Hello, and welcome back to another panel episode this week of Together We Feel, where we're talking about the power of the written word. I've got 5 magnetic women with me here. They've all been on our platforms in different ways, whether it's the radio show, the podcast, both. And they're back here to talk about what the written word means to them, the impact it has on them. And they all have books or ways they can work with you on your book that you're going to get to hear about as well. But we're going to talk about the impact in even in today's world of technology and social media, how important it is to still have these books, have the written word as a way to heal, to connect, to share a story, to build a bridge, to create spaces for conversations that maybe you're having a hard time finding another way to do right now. So I'm super honored today to have with me Grishma Shah, Nova Taladin, Puja Shah, Giovanna Silvestre, and Ellen Smith. And they're all joining me from all over the country today in different time zones. But Grishma, let's start with you. Talk to us about what your book is, where we can find it, and why you wanted to be here today.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Grishma. My book is called Anagram Destiny. It is a story, quite frankly, it's a story about the Indian American dream in the United States and then changes taking place across the world, specifically in India, and kind of ties a whole bunch together. And speaking of the power of the word, my day job is I'm a professor and I do a lot of writing, but I do a lot of nonfiction writing. And so I was really inspired to turn to fiction because I began to think it's a more powerful tool to build empathy and compassion than the nonfiction writing I've been doing specifically. And I don't want to undermine like memoirs or anything like that, but really like what I write is academic journal papers, something no one really reads. And if they read them, they're really getting just data and statistics from them. And data and statistics don't tell the real stories. They don't tell the compassionate stories. And so I began to look at fiction for a greater impact.
Thank you for that. And where can we find your book?
Sure. My book you can be found anywhere books are sold. Amazon. If you want to support small business, it's on bookshop.org. You can request it at your local library. So anywhere books are found. And my website is shahgrishma.com.
Okay. And all of this will be in the show notes. So don't worry, folks. It'll all be there. But I want to make sure each one gets a chance to share that. Neva, hello. Tell us about you. I know about you, but tell everybody else about you.
Hello. Thank you, Melissa. My name is Neva Talyaden, and I am a developmental and copy book editor. I edited Melissa's book, Embracing Layers. And I've worked with Wall Street Journal and Publishers Weekly bestsellers and Kirkus reviewed books, mostly nonfiction, although I edit fiction as well. And I am here as the thorn among the beautiful author roses. I'm still working on my own book, but I am happy to contribute my perspective as a book editor on the power of the written word, which is why I went into editing, because I feel like if your story is not somehow part out there as found in a published form, then it's not part of the conversation. And so I am obsessed, passionate about getting more stories out there of traditionally, historically marginalized voices, and especially women's voices out there, and to feel more courageous about publishing and getting out there. So happy to be here.
Happy to have you. All right, Puja.
Hi, everyone. I am Puja, and this is my book for my sister. It's actually a book about twin sisters, Amla and Asya, and they are unknowingly trafficked in India and then separated across the world from each other. And the whole journey of the book is on their sisterhood, resilience, strength. It's really on, it won't give it away, but if they intertwine again. But mostly it shines lights on a lot of girls' rights issues, on colorism, on topics that are really nuanced throughout as just details, but even on some of the political disturbance in India. And so for me, it was a journey of bringing out complex issues in the world in a way that is seen through the eyes of girls. And this is inspired by my own nonprofit work. I've been writing since I was a girl and had written short stories when I was volunteering in Uganda and in India many years ago. And one of them was this short story that then turned into a novel. And so for me, it was just capturing some of the stuff I saw in the eyes of the girls I was with and putting it on paper, because I'm like, if this moves me enough to be here and to write a story about it, my hope is one day a book will move people to actually talk about it or make change about it, or even just let it enter their heart, because it's topics that I think really we can do without in this world, in the injustices against girls and women. So that is why I'm here. And my site is formysisterbook.com.
Okay, great. Thank you. Giovanna.
My turn. My name is Giovanna Silvestre, and I wrote Confused Girl, Find Your Peace in the Chaos. And it is part memoir, part self-help. And the premise of the book is that confusion is actually a virtue. And so I take readers through my discovery of that and how to utilize it, so that you no longer have to be ashamed about not having all the answers and not being perfect, whatever your idea of perfect is that doesn't exist, and that you can embrace your confusion, learn how to utilize it to make it your superpower and propel you forward. And I was inspired to write this book because in my late 20s, I went through a really dark depression, and I was able to get myself out of it and shift the way I started to see the world. And it became less about image based or I should be doing, and more about who am I? Why am I here? What's the meaning of life? Just those little questions. And and it was a really confusing time, but I'm so grateful for the confusion, because if I wasn't confused and I didn't have those questions, I wouldn't have a published book coming out. So very grateful, very, very grateful for all of it, for the confusion. And you can find my book on Amazon, Confused Girl, Find Your Peace in the Chaos. You can pre-order it. Also Barnes & Noble and Blackstone Publishing. It's on their site as well.
Thank you. All right, Ellen.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm going to read all of your books. They sound amazing, and all of the messages really resonate with me. And I think you would like my story too.
Yeah.
My name is Ellen R.V. Smith. I wrote Memoirs of a Suburban Troublemaker. That is me. And I was 16 and I wrecked that car about a month after I got it, hence troublemaking. So my story is I come from a broken home. I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia. I was a troublemaker. I was bullied. But I eventually learned how to fight back through, having a wonderful mentor. Her name is Puja, and in my neighborhood, and a good role model in my mother. And basically, the story shifts from, all of this hardship, and it's a comedy. Like I try to lighten up some of the topics, but to being a contributing member of society as an adult. So, and a lot of it is like Giovanna was saying, how I could reframe my past into what happened for me instead of what happened to me as a victim. So there's a lot of resilience. There's a lot of, introspection and looking inside myself to, hold myself accountable for the things that I did, but also to hold others accountable. I wanted to write it because I wanted people that are like me, people that are perceived as outsiders or troublemakers to feel less alone in the world, and to encourage them, to just try everything and by trial and error, you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You can find it on Amazon. I think it's on every major website that sells books. I also read it on Audible. So you can hear me butcher a bunch of accents and speak in other languages and sing. So yeah, check it out.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Like I said, all that will be in our show notes, but I wanted each of them to share. So Ellen, let's go back to you. Talked about this a little bit, but talk to me about why you chose a book and how that, I know a little bit about this. I know that it was a big healing thing for you. I know that it allowed you to really bring some things together. I share about your mom's, a little bit that she shares forward. Thank you. In the beginning of the book, because I think I have not seen anything like that before. And I thought it was really cool, but I want to start with you.
Yeah. So writing a memoir is very difficult when you didn't grow up having the perfect childhood. So trying to get buy-in from my immediate family members was not easy. There were many, many rewrites. And, at some point, I just said to my mom, I'd really like you to have your say. So why don't you write the foreword, and you can, say whatever you want. I will not edit it. I did have to edit some of the things that some of the chapters, but in the end, I held my ground on things that I thought were really important, because I didn't want to show that we have a perfect relationship. I wanted to show that we, we're both human beings, and we're subject to error, and we evolved into and repaired our relationship on the way. And I think it's a beautiful story. So, but when I was writing the book, at first I thought, God, I don't know if I have anything to say. And then I ended up with a 175,000 word journal about everything that ever happened in my entire life. And I also tried to tie it into the history of Reston, which I find very fascinating. It was established in 1964 before any fair housing laws, Virginia versus Loving, before the Civil Rights Act, in a red Confederate state. And it was open to all Americans to purchase home and land. So it was very groundbreaking for its time. And I was inspired by Bob Simon, the founder's story. So I tried to do a parallel story of him growing up, and Reston's story and mine. And even people that are from Reston were like, I love Reston. I grew up here, but I kept skipping it to get to your story. So it took a while to get that confidence, mostly because every time I gave it to my family, they're like, you can't say this stuff. And so I had a lovely editor like Neva that was a content editor, and helped me see and give me confidence that my story can stand on its own. So you guys are really key. The story, the book wouldn't have happened without Malka. So.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you. All right. And Giovanna, why the book? I mean, because you've done a lot. You've done clotheslines and blogs. You've got different things, but what made you decide the book?
It was really random. It's not like when I was a child, I wanted to be a writer or I dreamed of writing a book. I literally was on my way to my parents' house, and it just hit me like a lightning bolt. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to write a book now. and my whole body just was filled with joy and excitement. And I went home and I told my parents, I'm going to write a book. And they're like, okay. And so, and when I'm just the type of person, when I get an inspiration for something, I do it. And I just go for it, very focused. And I don't really mess around with things that don't inspire me or excite me. So I had this inspiration, and I knew I didn't want to write it here. I knew I wanted to go someplace really relaxing and someplace, less expensive too. So I didn't really have to worry about money. So I moved to Indonesia for a year, and I lived in Bali, and I wrote the book there. And then I also lived in Berlin for a year and finished the book there. And then when I came back, I did a book proposal, and I went after an agent, and I got a really good, very seasoned agent. And she had the book proposal for 2 years and pitching it to publishing companies. And I was rejected for 2 years. But what's really cool about this is that I wasn't my worth wasn't attached to my achievements anymore. I was just happy that I did it and followed what I thought was, my heart, followed my heart.
Yeah.
And I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'll figure it out, or I can self-publish. It's fine. And then 2 months before my father passed away, 2 publishing companies, it's so funny, it does that with the balloons. Two publishing companies had a bidding war on my book. And then I signed with a Blackstone Publishing, and it was like a way bigger advance than I ever thought was possible. And my dad got to know that I was going to do this before he passed away. So the whole thing has just been a beautiful adventure.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, so good.
So exciting. I mean, all of it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
My second one now. I'm ready.
Good for, I can't wait. Oh, that'll be good. Okay. All right. More on that later. But, Puja, share with us, you writing, I love your story because Puja knew early on when she was a kid that writing was something she wanted to be part of. But there was also, and we hear about this a lot, this expectation as an immigrant kid that she would go out and do those things that would allow her to be successful, to honor her parents, sacrifice, those kinds of things. So she got steered in a different direction, went down the medical field, but that writing was a piece of her, early on. So talk to me about that and then getting back to it and what that's meant to you in this as you found your way back home.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love how you said that, way back home, because I think that's exactly what writing was to me. It was a sense of home, a sense of belonging. I mean, growing up, I was writing poems on the back of napkins. I was winning all these short story and writing awards, and not really. And this was all just done by myself. I was the first of 3 with my family, and my parents were hardworking immigrants. They weren't at home like, let's read your story around, the kitchen table. They were just like working, and they hardly knew what I was writing or doing. And they'd get like a call from my teacher, like, she just won the national competition for this story. And they'd be like, great. And so, it was, for me, it was what I knew, that came from inside of me. And then my parents, who were both in the medical profession, were like, hey, dental school's a great option, apply to these programs. And so I kind of was like, I remember even questioning it and being like, well, I love writing and I've taken all these courses at Columbia in high school, like, what do I do? And they were just like, writing's a great hobby. Because to them, success was dictated by what got them to this country, which was at the time, doctor, lawyer, engineer, according to the Immigration Act amendment. So for them, they're like, those are the 3 options. And so I went that path. And even in that path, I was performing spoken word when I was in grad school at any chance I could get. I was running to Gotham writing classes when I was in my residency. It was just who I was. There was no question to me that I will never abandon this part of me, because it's just what I know as home. And so as I continued to move through life and had a successful career, just like my parents said I would, when I get into that profession, I was doing yoga. I did all my yoga trainings. I was meditating. I was teaching meditation. And I started to really dive into the parts of me and myself and wonder, well, is this what life is about? Is life about what was dictated and told to me? And yes, on the surface, looks really great. But internally, like, what's my conflict? And my conflict was, I'm not doing enough of what I love, what's home. And so I started this novel, like I said, back when I had gone and done volunteer work across the world. And then I would work on it every once in a while. But having a full-time job, being a mom of 2 kids, living in Southern California is not easy. That's what I did. I focused on on the things that I had poured my life and everything into. And then every once in a while, I'd take out this book, this manuscript, and I'd work on it. I'd take it to writing conferences. When my son was born, I remember telling my husband, I just need to get out of here for like a weekend. I was just, needed. And my friends were like, what are you going to do? I was like, I'm going to write a conference. Like every chance I got, that's where I would end up. And it wasn't until I went to one conference, the topic, ironically, was writing for social change, and the whole conference. I had no idea. And I was so inspired to finish the book at that time that's when I really actually started working on it, daily. And then during the pandemic, I stopped traveling for work, and I stumbled down the stairs literally like one night, and I looked at, my family, and I'm like, I finished my book. And they're like, what? What do you mean? And so that's when it just started. And I think that once I made that internal transition, it's truly an internal transition. Nothing else really mattered. Success wasn't what I had imagined it to be. And success really was then what we're talking about now, which is my story reaching people's hearts and then connecting with people. That's all that really mattered to me ever since I was a kid. Right. So I was like, then I found my way back home. So that, and I love some of what, we're all sharing here, because it's all the same. We're all just telling a story of how we return back to home. And whether it's through fiction, whether it's through nonfiction, whether it's through something that happened in our 20s or whatever it is, that is the place. And that is what touches other people. That is what the power of word does. It allows my home to connect to someone else's, and then it's just the same. So anyway, that's how it all came together.
Thank you for that. So good. So Neva, why did you decide? You've really decided to hone in on women's voices, marginalized voices. Is there a specific experience that steered you that way, or did you just kind of always know you wanted to do that?
Well, I started my career as a writer, a published poet in the Philippines, and then journalist. And then because the immigrant story, Puja, is very familiar, obviously, to me as well. If you're not in the preferred professions, as you said, lawyer, doctor, it's very hard to find financial stability. And so I stumbled into editing as a way to find a more stable financial career, financially supporting career for me. And I realized that being in a supportive role for authors is as much of a passion as writing. And so I will get to my own journey of writing someday, like a book. But again, writing doesn't only have to be a book for other people. It could be a short form, it could be a blog, it could be a newsletter. But obviously, like, the book is something that's a really powerful object. It's a symbol of the power of the written word, and being part of that supportive and connective tissue for really bringing out stories that, especially those that have been minimized or suppressed for so long, is important. Because I feel like Grishma and you have had the idea of this conversation because you realize that, hey, reading different genres, we can actually access parts of ourselves that are empathetic. We can access different parts of ourselves that we don't allow ourselves to go to if we're just reading just one kind of genre. And so it's good to read different things, different topics, different genres. And so that's where I had my idea of, like, really championing voices that I don't see a lot. If you're a writer, one way to think of a topic is that, what is a book that you have always wanted to read and you haven't really found, right? And so for Giovanna, it's about, like, confusion. Like, nobody, people have written about leadership, confidence, right? But approaching it from a place of, like, confusion, as not reframing that as not a negative negative thing necessarily, that's really a breakthrough, an insight that other people can really relate to. Writing a memoir about like Ellen, about her childhood and about reframing being a troublemaker as a necessary stage to really becoming the woman that she is now. Those in the past, those would not be published.
Yeah.
And so now that we have this opportunity because of technology, because of the internet, because of globalization, to have access to these stories, I would want us to catch up. I would like women, black and brown authors to catch up and tell their stories so that other people who are not necessarily in those lived experiences, they can access it, and we are all the better for accessing these stories, you know. And it's not just about, you know, going up on your soapbox and preaching. On the contrary, it's just that we are better when we see different parts of we access different parts of our humanity. And the story of somebody from halfway across the world can resonate in can complete out a part of our story too that we never knew would happen, right? And I would rather hear about the lived experience from somebody who has lived that experience, because I can only access that secondhand, and there's nothing like listening to somebody's story firsthand. We no longer have the luxury of sitting around a campfire and like hearing each other. There's so many of us in the world now, right? And so the written word and the book is a subversive way, is a really but accessible way of learning these stories, whether fiction or nonfiction, right? So that's what really interested me in coming into a supportive role as an editor, to shepherd more of these stories out in the world.
Yeah. Oh, so much good stuff there. And you can tell the editor in her, because she was listening and picking up everybody's different parts of the story. And I can tell you, we would not have our book out here in the way that we do without Neva's guidance. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but not before I get to Grishma, because Grishma and I's conversation back in November on the radio show is what inspired me to have this conversation here today, because we were talking about the power of the written word to connect people that might see themselves as being on different ends of the spectrum in what they believe how the world should function. But it's actually can be a way to be like, oh, you want your kids to be safe too. Oh, you want to have access to a good education too. Oh, you want to have financial stability too. Maybe we just have a different idea of how to get there, but it can bring that common ground back together in a time that is so divisive in so many places. And so when her and I are talking about that, I'm like, oh man, we need to have this conversation. So, but something that I thought was really important too is, Grishma, your why behind this, because you live in the world of academia where you've got all of this data and all these stats, but you also teach business students about being mindful of the impact that their business decisions make on humans. So you're probably one of the most empathetic human voices within a business school filled with a lot of numbers and statistics and data. So you already have that piece of you going on. But I love your why behind you deciding to do this fiction story and the homage that it is. So you want to talk about that for a minute?
So I should thank you, Melissa, for those kind words. So I have a background like Puja in international development. So my PhD is in international development, and like her, at a young age, I did a lot of volunteer work across the world. Particularly with a group called Operation Smile, and I went to Kenya and South Africa and all over the world with them. I grew up very differently, probably like very similar in values, probably differently than Puja, in the sense that my parents were not professionals. We moved to this country when I was 7, and my parents worked at motels. I started my journey into the United States as a 7-year-old at a motel that my parents, worked at. And I used to follow them around and help them clean the rooms and do whatever else was needed, like literally survival mode in very many ways, which is what I've captured in the book, which is like this upbringing at a roadside motel in the South. But what I find is I intertwine the story of globalization within that and how the world is changing and all of those things. But because I have this background in international development, I'm always teaching my students with storytelling, because so much of business school is about profit making. And so like we really need to move away from that and make it a much more socially conscious environment. And so I bring in the stories to kind of say, hey, like Coca-Cola can go open a factory in India, but did you know they drained the water from that area? And let's talk about what that meant for the farmers, and all of those things. And I started telling the stories, they really began to see how important their long-term decision making is going to be in the world, which is like, in 10 years, when I'm, an executive and I'm making decisions, it's so important to think about them consciously. And I said, wait, it's not the statistics or numbers that are really resonating with them. It's the stories that are resonating with them. And, post 2016, to be honest with you, I was feeling really despondent. Like, I was like, okay, great. This is like, 20 years of spent on a career to like help change and save the world. And like, here we are. Right. And so I had a very candid class with my students that week, and we all just sat around and told our stories, and they were all different. And there were people on all sides, like both sides of the aisle, all sides of the aisle, and they all walked away thinking like, this was the best class we've ever had on campus, because we just talked to each other and we told each other our stories. And, so much of the emotions that we crave and want in the world are so universal. Like they're so universal. Like we talked to, we want next generation to be happier than us. We want our parents to be happy. We want to feel validated. All of these things are so similar. If you can capture so much of it in a story, you're bringing people together. And so I turned to fiction for that reason, which is that, hey, there is room for data and stats, and that should be done because you don't want to push anything without real research. But then how you communicate that research, how you get it to people to build empathy and compassion is a totally different mechanism, right? And that's really when I turned to fiction, is post, like sort of like in the last 8 or 9 years is like, and it took that long, honestly, 7 years to get this book out. As all of you know, getting a book in the world is not easy. And so now that it is out, and I've been talking to a lot of people about this story, I get a lot of texts like, your book made me cry. Your book really made me cry. And it really, it's not things that are happening. It's the immigrant experience in the book. That's me. It's touching people. And, with everything going on, if just that part resonates, it's mission accomplished. But yeah, I think there's just sitting with any character for 8 to 9 hours versus a 3-second reel is going to build a level of compassion that is unfounded in modern technology.
Yeah. That's a great way to put that.
Yeah, and it's also like the attention you have when you're reading a book is very different from the attention that's being demanded of you when you're looking at social media. It's meant to get a reaction, right? But a book is meant to make you sit in your feelings, to really feel, to really think. It's meant to make you think. It's not asking you to have a knee-jerk reaction. And so it's a much more natural cycle of thinking, processing, reflecting. You're developing your muscles for critical thinking, surprisingly, even if it's fiction. With fiction, it's like also the imagination muscles, your capacity to imagine beyond your current reality. And so those are great exercises for being a human being. And that's why like the written word is still, they keep saying, it's the death of printing, the death of publishing. They've been saying that for 100 years now, since the industrial revolution, but it hasn't died, because as we've seen, it's our humanity is still needed.
Yes. That's such a good way to say that. Giovanna, I know that you've got a timeline, so I want to give you a chance to talk before you've got to jump off. What has stuck out to you in this conversation so far? Is there anything you want to ask anybody or even make a statement about or connection on?
Well, I just love the fact that we're all women, different ages, from different backgrounds, just living our dream and doing what's in our heart to do.
Yeah.
And I do get the immigrant experience as well because my father is from Italy. And so I grew up working in my family's Italian restaurant. And I had pressure to take that over as well. And so I do really understand that. And then I did actually take it over for 2 years. I talk about that in my book as well. And, but I was very miserable, very unhappy. I was constantly fighting with my dad. So I came back to Los Angeles, and then, I kind of told you, depression, confusion, all the things. And, I think this is just such a beautiful time in the world where women of any age, any background, we're doing amazing things.
Mm-hmm.
Women in their 70s are writing books about being in your 70s and what's that like.
Mm-hmm.
And that it wasn't the case before. It was kind of like you're hot stuff in your 20s, but then after your 20s, your women kind of were just put in a corner, like, okay, you're just there to take care of your kids and nobody cares about you anymore.
Yeah.
And now we're like, no, we're doing great things in our 40s and our 50s and our 60s and our 70s. And we have stuff to offer and we have stuff to share. And it's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. All right. Does anyone have any questions for Giovanna before she has to jump off?
Giovanna, I just want to say, I love how you use confusion. I think that confusion happens like at every stage of life, like you just said. Like when I was like, do I leave my job? Confusion is such a big part of growth. And I can't wait to check your book out. I think it's something women are often, kind of in all the moments, in like, am I doing this right for my kid? Am I doing this right for my job? Am I, all the different times you're confused, because a lot of times we are conditioned to question ourselves, like this in society. And I think it's not, there's just something to naming it and saying it's part of a journey that, I find so beautiful. So awesome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. And that's true. And that was the reason to write it too, because I realized that you're always going to have a situation that comes up that you're going to be confused about, whether it's, I want to change college, what college to go to? Should I marry this guy? What do I do with these children now? Now I got used to these kids and they're leaving the house. What do I do now? And so it's a constant thing. And I see people really clinging to, they don't want things to change because they're scared of the confusion. They're scared of the unknown. But that, change is inevitable.
Yeah. Yes. One of the things that she and I talked about when we recorded for the radio show a couple months ago is that confusion invites curiosity, which gets rid of judgment. I mean, there's such a great through line there. If we can embrace it and see these things as opportunities, and what can I learn from it? And I just love the way the reframe that's happened there. I think that's so great. Real quick, because I have a question for Ellen. I actually want Ellen to share something really special that flows throughout her book that I think really speaks to what we're talking about today. So Ellen, in a moment, I want you to talk about the Jewish tradition that you very much in your own way, you and your sister have share with people each year, and you invite people from all backgrounds into how that flows through your book. But before I do that, especially with Neva here, I wanted to shout out Neva and her ability. What you're hearing from her today is so authentic. She took what we have. As many of you know that follow us know, we took the first 4 seasons of our podcast and converted it into book form so that we would have another medium to reach women with this framework of learning to live unapologetically, embracing all of your layers, prioritizing your wellness. Not everybody wants to listen to a podcast, but we also wanted to create community for those that already do and they wanted to engage in a more personal way. And she tapped into that. She saw it from the get-go. She helped us reframe it in a way that was connectable, that made sense, and reordered it in such a meaningful way. And I knew, going back to 2017, when I lived on Long Island, I was part of a group called Her Story. Kind of tripped into it and I had this fun connection with a couple of you here via Adelphi University, which we would have never known about otherwise, which is so wild because Adelphi is not a big university on Long Island, but yet there's many of us here in this group that know where it is and spent time there. But I was working in the mentoring program there and got connected with Her Story. And it was the first time I really saw the written word in action, where sharing stories and listening to other people's stories authentically, literally changed the way I understood other people's experiences. It literally changed the way I vote, the way I see the world. It literally had that much power. I will never, ever forget it. And through doing my own memoir work, I've got 80 pages of stuff out there in the world on a Google Doc somewhere that I may or may not do something with someday, but it really opened the door through my own healing journey, but also connected me with other people. And I saw it in action with middle school girls sharing their stories, sharing their backgrounds, and all of a sudden seeing themselves and each other's as human and as having a story worth being heard, that they deserve to have a voice in the room. And so there's just so many ways that those words and these books and these stories hold so much power within them to create those connect points. I had connect points in my Her Story group with people that on paper I should not have a connect point with. But yet I did, because of the common ground that we found in our stories, because of experiences that we had, even sometimes decades apart, that had a similar vein to them, even in different parts of the world, but they still had the same interaction with parents or emotion attached to them with a sibling. I mean, there was just so many through points. So that for me is why I believe in this so much. And I'll continue to talk about this and was so passionate about this conversation today. And Ellen's going to share yet another example that is woven throughout her book, but share a little bit with people about this, because I think it's so powerful.
Sure. The background is that when my parents were still married, they got divorced when I was 8. My most fond memories was being with family for Passover. And, when my parents got divorced, we stopped doing it. And then in college, when I was at University of Tennessee, most of my friends didn't know any Jewish people. They didn't even know who was Jewish on television, which was shocking. But I wanted to recreate that familial, open, inclusive environment for my friends so that they can understand a little bit about Judaism and feel invited. Because I think that's the way to stop anti-Semitism, honestly. If it's possible to single-handedly thwart the next Holocaust, it's just invite people to see your culture and make them a part of it. And so, as an adult, we started having these Passover parties and strategically inviting people that didn't have a background in Judaism or, had never been to a Passover Seder before. But you were talking about a book that changed the way you vote, changed the way you think. For me, that was Handmaid's Tale, because I didn't want that to happen. And I'm very worried that it's the path that we're going onto. But, being a writer and trying to teach people, or encourage people to be tolerant of other cultures is really difficult. To not sound like you're lecturing. And I really liked Grishma's example of her classes where she's, asking people to tell their own stories so they can connect, and then using the power of stories to try and get empathy out of people so that they understand what's really happening in the world. But it's a fine line. And I don't know if I was able to tell it, but I hope I did, because I think that's what we all need right now. It's just a little bit more tolerance and a lot more empathy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's in you when you hear somebody's story, it makes them a human. It makes them somebody that you know now. And it also, you may not come out of the room agreeing with them on everything, but it puts a human face to the name and gives you some background on how they got to where they are. Like, there's a lot of people, if I know their story, I'm like, I'm still not with you on this, but I get how you got there. Mm-hmm. And based on what your experience was, what your environment was, what you've learned, I understand how it is that this is where you ended up. And then that creates space for conversations. And I think that is the power that books have to capture us. Ellen, do you have questions that you would like to ask any of our other writers here?
I think it was Giovanna mentioned being a doer, and I found a quote. I don't know who it's from, but I just looked for one. It says, "You're not just a dreamer, you're a doer, and the world will see everything you create." And I really hope that's true for all of us, because I think that all of our books have a powerful message, or our contributions, Neva, to books. And I think that if we could just break through the barriers and get our words out there into the world, that we could make the change and stop the hate and move the needle and, become the world that we want. And it's in our grasp. We just have to keep trying.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about this before we got on to record, but it came up with Grishma and I's conversation a couple months ago. I think this is so interesting that people are more likely to pick up a fiction book that is very different from what they believe in or what their background is versus a nonfiction book. They'll tend to pick something up that's a little closer to what their reality is or what they believe. Why do we think that is? I'm curious to hear what everybody has to say about that, because it makes sense to me when she said it. It's also very fascinating about how the human mind works.
For me, I'm reading a book about the Irish Republican Army right now. Mm-hmm. And somebody mentioned it at my gym. And I was like, I want to know about that. I've heard about it my whole life. I have friends that are from Ireland. And I think that's what books do. They take you on a journey, and you get to learn about the world from different perspectives. For me, I listen to Audible, when I'm doing all these chores, mostly because I don't want to hear my own thoughts.
Yeah.
But I need that. I'm addicted to learning other people's stories, and I cannot wait to pick up your books. All of your messages really resonated with me. And I think we do all have the same goal, which is to, connect with other people and have our stories out there so that they can, see themselves in it, a different way. Maybe.
Yeah. Learn from your story, but also not feel so alone in their own.
Yeah. And empowered.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to chime in and just say, in terms of Ellen's book, for instance, even though technically memoir is nonfiction, I would still kind of put it more towards, it's a narrative, right? It's very probably easy to read because it's a memoir. But when I look at that title, it could be so many things. That troublemaker part of it could be anything, really. And so I'm very much likely to pick it up. Whereas if it was a nonfiction book about, I don't know, whatever some of those topics that are in her themes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whatever are in her book, I would probably be I don't really want to read about those themes. But if she weaves it through her narrative, I'm oh, okay. Yeah, I could see why, a 16-year-old crashed their car and understand it better than
right. But troublemakers today in the workforce, that's a highly sought out attribute, being able to, challenge the status quo and be a disruptor.
Yeah.
Because, like Giovanna was saying, change is inevitable, right? And we're always going to be changing. And so people are so adverse to it, but it's how we evolve.
Oh, I was gonna say writing is meant to be dangerous. Writing is meant to be something that calls out what no one is talking about or noticing, or what many are afraid to notice. So on the topic of troublemakers, a lot of the troublemakers historically have been writers, and so it's funny because we're talking about writing
That's
as
so true.
It's our hobby. It's like we do it on the side, but I see it more as like this is something that you would do even if you weren't paid. And so that is powerful, and that's why there are movements to ban books, to discourage learning, to discourage critical thinking, which are all the things that you need to be a writer, because it's scary to have people do something that's non-transactional. Because you can never compromise them, and that is a scary thought for people who have agendas or for people who want to control the narrative. And so whether it's a small personal story, or whether you're writing about historical or even academic papers, because it takes a lot as well to write an academic paper. It doesn't matter how big or small you think it is, but contributing to the world as a writer is essential, because you are continuing to move the tradition of reading and writing forward. You're encouraging other people somewhere in the world in some way. And that's why I think, as Grishma pointed out, like we pick up the interesting titles, and mostly fiction uses that, right? The doing the hook with the titles. Memoirs are now also doing that, but emphasizing the human part instead of the lesson part, because we don't want a math textbook. Like most of us don't like textbooks, right? And so if it's fiction, we kind of like gravitate towards that because we feel like it doesn't demand so much of us.
Yeah. And I think we go into it with a more open mind too. Like we're going into it to learn about something or a topic or a place or even escape. I mean, so many times, we're reading it and then within that we get captured within the story. If I pick up a really good, compelling book, I am not above staying up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning and pounding that thing out because I just can't put it down. But it's also something usually that's really struck me in a way that I hadn't thought before. It's created a real response in me. It's also kept me present within the story. And I think that, that's where the power of story is so important, and to continue to be open to it, to continue to be learners. And that's why we so desperately need the written word as a way to connect. And I see it as an avenue forward in times where, for me right now, if I'm someone I'm having a hard time connecting with, it's been in my life long enough that I desire to try to find a through point. There's some people that there are seasons and you move on and that time has its season. I have a few relationships that have been with me for 35, 40 years, and we're at very different places right now, but I still have the desire, because of the time and investment put in, to find a through point. And so I'm always looking, where's a book where we can find a common thread, where we can find a through point, where we can find a connection to reconnect on the values that we do still hold true, that are common, even if we see a different avenue to getting to them. So I can't say enough about the importance of all of your work and what you do and putting your stories out there. One of my favorite things about Ellen's book was she has mastered the ability. One, they're really short chapters, but there's a lot within the chapter. I mean, I pounded out her 300 plus page book in less than 24 hours. Like, I was reading 4 books at one time. I wanted to get them because different guests had different books, and I want to have them read and ready so I can really have a meaningful podcast conversation with them. But she also, within that, she chose this line of speaking truth, being empathetic, and holding all parties accountable all at the same time. She also has 9 million lives, and you'll have to read her book to read that, because Troublemaker is not under
Definitely lucky to be alive. There.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, holy crap. How did she survive all these things? And I'm so thankful she did. So
Me
that's
too.
yes, absolutely. That's your tease. But it was also like, it helped me think about things in a different way. I'd never thought about, I've got my own background with Judaism that I still don't fully understand. My great grandfather came over from Germany, was a jeweler in San Francisco, but my grandmother's mother divorced him early on. And so when he died before I was even born. So he's this whole kind of missing piece of my history that I don't really know a lot about. And so that brought back to mind some questions about my own history that I hadn't tapped into really before in a long time. It just brings different things, that the way the stories are told, the way Grishma brings us into her story and her homage to her parents, but also understanding, I could visualize all of the different stores and motels I went into throughout my life that have been managed or run by Indian families. I was just like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that before until you brought that, and the why behind that, and how that was seen as a way to create some income, some stability, to get the family here, and then create a pathway for the next generation to go on and live their American dream and live, it was just such an interesting way. I really, really want you and your mom, you had such a meaningful share with us on the radio show when you and your mom recorded a segment for us. And it was such a powerful connection. I think that should be a short story for sure. Like, I love that so much.
It's in the works.
I love that. I love that so much, because also the relationships. I mean, your relationship, Puja had to leave, but she talks about, she has the sister relationship. Your sister relationship is woven throughout your story, Ellen. Your relationship with your parents, even though it is a fiction story, is woven throughout your story and the impact it had. And Neva, even as an editor, is still very active writing-wise in the story that she tells and brought her mom on to tell. So much power in that. And I just want to encourage all of our listeners today, be curious, be learners, grab a book that's outside of your zone. Think of a way to connect with someone that maybe you're at an impasse with or having a hard time connecting with. It's a long-term relationship. Where's a book that's a common ground for you that you can talk about together, that you can give as a gift? Pick up our book. It's a framework for how to live authentically healthy and well. It gives you a framework. It doesn't tell you how to do it, but tells you the questions to ask. Do that together in community. Ask those questions together in community and help each other find the answers of how to prioritize your wellness, your health, setting those healthy boundaries, living out of your own expectations, connecting points, good communication. There's just so many ways. All of these stories here that we've shared today. If you felt confused, don't feel bad about it. It's a tool. Giovanna is there to tell you about that. The beauty and terror and agony and heartbreak and triumph that is in Puja's story is, for my sister, is so powerful. I mean, there's just so much in just this group of amazing people that I've been able to gather today for this conversation. We could talk about this all day, but we're running short on time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But one more time, I'm going to go to each of you that are still here with me and talk about what is one takeaway that you hope people listening have today from listening to this panel conversation. Grishma, we'll start with you.
I think my takeaway has been from this panel, which is that, what Puja said, which is that we are all writing stories from a place of vulnerability, and the characters in our story are only relatable, and we only like the characters in our story when they're vulnerable. We hate the character who's getting everything they want and so forth. And so remember that likability and being vulnerable, all of those things are actually playing into you being human and connecting with other people.
Yeah. Oh, that was good. I like that. Thank you. Neva.
I was going to say the power of the written word, you can access it however way you need to or you want to. Like there's a huge debate about reading actual, physical books and audiobooks. They're both reading. And if you can however way you can access it, please do. And you don't have to be a writer to be to really amplify the power of the written word. Sharing your favorite books with others that you think it might help them or touch them is a big help. We need readers as much as writers in this world. And just doing that, just engaging with different kinds of stories, taking a chance on different kinds of stories will go a long way for yourself as much as for other people.
Yeah. Thank you. Ellen, how about you?
I've got a quote. Another quote. Your dreams are valid, your goals are attainable, and your impact will be unforgettable.
Yes. And I think we need to remember that as women and hear other women saying that and doing that and knowing it's possible. No matter what room you're in, no matter what space you're in, you deserve to take up that space. You deserve to be heard, and you have a powerful story to tell, to share, but also pick up other people's stories. Listen to other people's stories. Be a good reader. And through that reading, be a good listener to what you're reading. And that's possible. It sounds weird to say that, but it really is possible. Listening, taking in those messages, seeing the humanity in those people's experiences, making you think about if something makes you uncomfortable or creates some discomfort or defensiveness, get curious about that. Ask yourself why it brings that up in you. Get curious about your own background. There's just so many ways to tap into this. But I want to thank you all today for your words, for your contributions, for your books, for being part of this conversation. I can't believe I get to know all of you. It really it's the favorite part of this work that I do is that I get to meet just incredible people like you that are being authentic, that are being vulnerable, that are being brave, that are showing up as your authentic selves and sharing your piece of your story and inviting others to do that as well. I think that's such an important, powerful thing. We must keep doing that. We must keep amplifying those voices, and we can be part of so many solutions, but we have to keep being vocal about it and sharing it and encouraging it and inviting other people into it. And that wraps up our time here today on Together We Feel, the power of the written word. Go to our show notes. You're going to find links to all these wonderful women and their books. Buy their books, read their books, share their books with other people. Buy our book and share it with other people. I always
invite us to your book clubs.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Invite us to your book clubs. We'd love to come talk to you and share our experience with you and let you ask us questions about why we decided to do this and go this route. It's so important. Our primary author, Jessica, couldn't be with us today. And so I'm standing in, but I chose Jessica purposefully because I knew she had a voice that I wanted reflected throughout our book. And so there's a lot of intent that goes behind it, but you as a reader have so much power as well, and to learn and share and be a part of this movement. Because we have to keep these books going. We've got to make sure they're available, even in spaces where we've told we can't get them. There's other places we can make sure they're available far and wide. We have to keep learning and keep that avenue to learning open. And I know we all know how important that is for all of us. Thank you, all of you ladies, for being with me today and for your contributions to this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you,
so much.
Melissa.
Great meeting
You
all
bet.
of you.
Oh, yeah. It was good bringing you all together. Oh, my gosh. All right. Go find your favorite book this week, guys. Read it again, read a new one, invite other people into it, have conversations about it, and just embrace the power of the written word. Take care and have a great week.